inspiration is not just that, it's not just a positive feeling. Inspired means that it's giving you that nudge or that push to do something,
Hmm.
right? That audacity is not, she is audacious and she has done that, and wow, that's amazing. No, it is, she can do it, I can do it. If I am not audacious, then what's going to happen? Who will step into that space? What world is going to happen? What space will happen? The kinds of things that I see and I don't like, that is what will happen. So I need to claim that space for myself and for others. Something just stepping up, just stepping in is all that you need. It doesn't have to be anything big or huge. Just that first step, volunteering, creating something, saying something, writing something, right? Changing something. And then it grows from there. And then you become that audacious woman who all she did was take a first step and a second one and a third one.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hello, I'm Bossy. We're here with Dr. Anino, who is an award-winning international speaker, a gender balance advocate, which I love and would love to dive into some, and the founder of 100 Women at Davos, which is a global community that meets during the World Economic Forum, but all year round, with amazing women that you have built this community of powerful voices. You are a former banker, a strategist. You are also everywhere. I don't know how you manage to be all the places you are. You're always speaking and bringing your presence and your influence to events. And I am really glad to get the opportunity to talk to you about the future of women. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Delighted to be here. And thank you for the invitation. And all those things you said, if you're talking about me, I'm not sure.
No, I do. There was a movie that came out like a year or so ago, and it was like something about being everywhere all at once. And I was talking to someone, I was like, that is Dr. Anino. She is everywhere all at once. But what's interesting is that you also talk a lot about quiet leadership. And that's leadership really rooted in clarity and expertise and presence rather than just volume. And I was kind of wondering how you came about to understand quiet leadership as not only valid, but as one of the strongest forms of influence we can have.
Thank you, Catherine. That is a really interesting question, and one that I haven't been asked before, but one that I think it's an important one. And you have different types of personalities, and I don't think that it's just a question of personality. Quiet leadership means thoughtful leadership. It means being intentional
Yeah.
about what it is you're doing. It means being clear about impact. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you're not quite sure where your full impact is, and you have to, shall we call it, experiment. But you know what it is your passion is, you know what it is your responsibility or your authority is.
Hmm.
And I think that that is really important. So even if you're in a corporate role or you're a thought leader, what is the extent of my authority? Influence means actually going past that authority into power, but you still need to know where the boundaries are. And I think that sort of affects my work in corporate governance. So there is a lot of thoughtful thinking about it. And I think that my background in research
Hmm.
actually really is important because every single thing, every sentence you wrote had to be justified.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't come out with things and say things that didn't have an antecedent and that hadn't been justified by research. And if you had a view or an opinion, you said it. And most of the time, your views or opinions were chucked out in research. We want to have, the solid known facts first, right?
Mhm.
So I think it really comes from that, and also my personality, which is very much a thinking personality.
I feel like in 2025, even more so probably in 2026, that's going to become even more important in leadership than maybe even in years past, with so many people just saying things and not having them be truthful or not having the right facts behind them. Um, but often we think of women as being this, quieter part of it thoughtful. And how do you think women are more than men tending towards this? Or do you think that's just how we view them?
One of that, first of all, of course, you have stereotypes, right? So
Right.
people might attach labels to, but the other thing as well is that very often successful leadership, right, is basically labeled as having certain, exhibiting certain behaviors. So
Right.
that is to say, a leader who is thoughtful and is successful, a male leader who's successful and very thoughtful, somehow that bit of thoughtfulness isn't recognized as part of the job. It's the go-getting bit.
Yeah.
So I believe that successful leaders tend to be anyway, right? But there's another element I feel about women's leadership. And, research has shown that we tend to look at things, we tend to ask more questions. We're more questioning. And we see that in when we talk about the words we use, we tend to use many more words, right? And very often they're questioning words as well
Hmm.
because very often we're looking at the impact way beyond that sort of circle of or the limitations of the thing we're talking about. It is how else is it affecting things and people and all of that.
Yeah.
And when you often say that women leaders are risk averse, but it's a good thing because research has actually shown, right, therefore, that the success rate is better because they have really thought through things, they have asked, they have questioned, right?
Hmm.
So it is a good thing, and therefore the outcomes are actually better. So it's a good thing to have that kind of thoughtful questioning, right? Because you're thinking of other things. The thing, though, is to take it to the next level. Once you've thought and you've questioned, then what? So you have to move from that into the action. And very often it's convincing because at a certain level of leadership, you are convincing other people, whether it's on boards, whether it's a group for, you're coming together to discuss something at leadership level. It's not just, your own team, and very often your team as well. So you need to move past all of that, right, into the action. And that is really very important. And one thing that actually I do know from my work working with women leaders, when they are new to a position, even generally speaking, that one thing that they tend to do, men do this as well, but I see it more often in women, that they systematically speak to all their reports and team members first at the beginning before coming out with, deciding on a plan of action, whatever it is. Even if they've thought about it, they tend to be to question. I assure you, I've worked with male leaders were the first group I worked with because I was in banking.
Yeah.
And I do see successful male leaders doing exactly the same thing. It's just unfortunately, because of stereotypes, that bit very often isn't focused on.
Yeah. That's interesting. I do feel like with men, we tend to focus on the assertiveness and outspokenness. But you are right. When I go and think, I saw something with Jeff Bezos talking about how he, asks other people's opinions first before saying his own to try to get honest, feedback and information that's not swayed by him. And I do really feel like you're right. That is just an attribute of good leaders to draw on those around them. You founded 100 Women at Davos, which is this global powerhouse of female leaders. Um, what was the moment you realized this community needed to exist?
There were two defining moments. The first was, having the immense privilege to attend the World Economic Forum. As a student of economics, it's something that I knew about decades before and never even thought that I would ever find myself there.
Yeah.
And therefore to, enter into this space. And I had worked in banking, as I mentioned, and so I was really used to working in male-dominated environments. And I assure you, Catherine, I didn't think of them as male-dominated. because I'd studied economics, studied maths.
Right.
It was just normal. I mean, I didn't look at the numbers. In those days, you just didn't. So
No.
nothing was awkward, nothing was strange. It was just normal. It was afterwards that I did. So it wasn't anything unusual to be um, in a space, right, where we had, of course, mainly male leaders. But what I thought, and it goes back to, my research background and all of that, is that at the end of the day, right, representation doesn't mean by proportion. Representation means that it's a reflection of certain things, right? And what I mean by that is that you have a group, right, which doesn't have to reflect what is happening externally, which we know is actually underrepresentation of women. Because in a room of, or in a place of 2,500 leaders in the world, it's only a fraction of leadership in the world. And so I wonder that why didn't we have more women in the room, right? And bearing in mind, by the way, at the World Economic Forum, has more representation of women than in the real world in leadership. Top leadership is only about 5 to 7%, which is shocking, right?
Yeah.
In global leadership, heads of state is probably about 10 or 11, but top CEOs in the world, biggest companies, is only about 5 to 7%.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so the proportion by the time I started going was 20%. So it was relatively high. But still, at the same time, I still felt that we needed more women in the room, not just to represent, but also to contribute to the discussions,
Yeah.
right? And so, and there's also a feeling of being, feeling sort of almost invisible when you are in the minority in that sense as well. And I thought we needed to know who are the women, where are they, and let's hear their voices. Apart from, of course, the top leaders who are the ones presenting or speaking, but just, basically participants. And we just need to know who they are and see more of them. So there was obvious, noticing that there weren't quite as many women, and yet knowing that there are a lot of women out there who were at that level. So that's one thing. And so I think the following year it was also I formed a group called Women at WEF, actually. It was Women at WEF, a WhatsApp group. And I started getting messages from outside the walls of the of the Congress Center saying that, there are women there as well, in Davos. And I didn't realize there was this ecosystem outside the walls. And so we began to have more and more women. And we held our first event outside the walls. And what happened literally was that the organization that was having an event and said, why don't you have your reception after us? We have, our talks, etc. And, use our space and invite your women. And we did that. And when I put out those tickets, right, for people to register, and I then we're getting messages back to say that, we can't register, we can't register. And I said, oh, we'll check, and there must be a problem at the back end because literally the tickets to register just went out, an hour ago. Catherine, those tickets had been booked in 1 hour,
Oh my
every
God.
single ticket. And then I told the organizers, or our hosts, and they said, look, put out the tickets again, right? Another set, because the turnout rate in Davos is only about 50%, right? So you've put out the same tickets for the same number, so double it again, right? And so you'll get the number. And we did that. Catherine, the same thing happened again. So they said, look, let's just try, go a third time.
Oh my gosh.
And women who are 100 women Davos who were there the first time will tell you, at that event, we had messages coming from outside. We can't get in through the door. I had to engage with women in the bar outside the door because there wasn't enough space in the room. It was jam-packed. It was crowded.
What a wonderful image to have and
Mm.
to think about that sort of thing in multiple settings where you couldn't even get them through the door. It's funny, but it's also this like beautiful image to think of women having so many women in the room that we don't even fit in the room anymore, that you need a bigger room to fit us all. And I was thinking like, what happens when women gather in these spaces? What becomes possible after this point?
It is amazing. First of all, I think you've always had business networks for men or business networks, so there's power in that in terms of driving business. But in addition, for women tend often or more often to deal within trusted networks. So that is when you build a network of trust, that is the beginning of creating those relationships that lead to business and impact. That's the first thing. So women tend to be less transactional that way without knowing. And I think it comes from historical social reasons. You had to make sure that, that there was safety within, the domain that you're protecting, right? You had to make sure there was safety. So women tend to work well in trusted networks. The second thing is information passes, right? At leadership level, within networks, which is why you have business networks, right? It's not all about, you can see a lovely CV and all of that, but how do we know? So there's also that. And there's a lot of information women have been locked out of, therefore are spreading through those networks as well. And you're meeting people that you wouldn't normally meet.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. There was one study, I remember that I tried to find it, but I remember it was a researcher who wrote about it, and she was just convinced naturally that networks are important. This was a few years ago. And someone said to her that, well, how are we sure that this women's conference is delivering any value whatsoever, right? How are we sure that it might be feel good? And she was a researcher, she did the research, and what she found out, right? Things like women who got themselves a promotion, more than promotion, better pay rises after the conference,
Wow.
right? Or business deals. The mere fact that you're in a room with other women, you hear about other women's experiences, you feel that you're in a trusted environment, right? It does give you that, extra oomph.
Yeah.
And I've seen, I mean, we had something at Unger, I think it was. And we had this women chatting, because that's the way we looked
Right.
at
That's how
chatting,
yeah.
chatting,
Yeah.
yeah,
Men don't chat,
chatting.
but we do.
Oh
Yeah.
no, women were chatting.
Yeah.
Next thing I heard, there was a big potential transaction between the two women.
Wow.
There you go.
Yeah.
So a lot does happen, but the other thing that happens as well, it's not all about getting to where you're going to in terms of your business and in terms of career and all of that, which is critically important because we want women to be in those leadership positions. We want women to do well. We want women to grow their wealth because
Right.
their wealth is not only for them, but it also impacts society, families, etc. But what we also find when you have a woman in the room like that is that it's both business and impact. Right?
Yeah.
Impact meaning making life better for other people that are not necessarily within your domain of work, right? Okay,
Mhm.
a better world. So that's the other advantage of having women in the room. It's great for society as well.
You talked a second ago about money, women talking about money. And I've heard you speak about how women still hesitate to talk openly about money, investing, equity, power. Why is this and how do you think we go about breaking into women feeling more comfortable to discuss? It's so important. If you're single, if you're married, how do you go about having us break into being more open about talking about that?
First of all, is to understand the background of that a little bit and to see the paradox in it. So the first thing is that if you look at the data or look at the research, in a lot of the Western countries, from the US to the UK to Europe, women could not open a bank account unless it was signed off by their husbands till in many countries in 65 or 1970s.
Wow.
Yet banking is something that is medieval. Bank, the word is a bonk, is a wooden bench, medieval times in Florence. People would go through this money lender they'd give them money and then they would go and trade, right?
Mhm.
So that's the origin. So it's medieval. So banking has medieval origins, yet women couldn't open bank accounts in many advanced countries until on their own, 65 to 75. So women were financially excluded. It's as simple as that. So
Mhm.
it's only recent. So once you're excluded, you don't have those conversations.
Right.
Secondly, even the laws were about dispossessing women of their assets. That was what the laws were. Married women. The laws. It was a deliberate, right? Whether it was thought it was thought for good things in sort of, in 200 years ago. But that was so women have been out of that circle of investment, finance, and all of that. So that's the first thing. So it's not natural. Okay. But at the same time, when you look at consumer spending, women are responsible for making decisions of about maybe two-thirds of consumer spending around the world.
Mhm.
Right. So we do have the ability to make good financial decisions, but we just haven't been in the space. The second thing is that when the space then grows or that space is not created for us as the counterparty to those discussions. And therefore, the way products and services are delivered and the way the advisory is given is not necessary. It doesn't necessarily suit women. And women very often just, recoil. So the first thing is to know that it's our space, that we need to be in that space, right? And to spend some time finding, the right financial advisors. We ran a session on that, I think, a few weeks ago, by a wealth management specialist who had worked in banking. So that's the first thing. We need to be conscious about that and find ourselves into that space, right? And make inquiries. And that's why we try to share this information within, and the knowledge within the communities that we have. So that's the first thing. So it's historical. The thing about it is that to know that there is a direct relationship between money, power, and influence, right? And so if we have been, and women have very often been making change, right? Not being in that position of economic power, it has been from like movements and protests and all of that, right? Okay, so therefore the power comes from getting many people. Our male peers know because they have been in that space that if you have money, your influence, it's easier to create influence. And so we need to be in that space that having control over financial resources helps us to be able to make the change that we want. It's much easier. Having those resources means that you can place the resources in those places that you want, whatever it is, whether it's for social impact, etc. So we need to be, we need to have that realization that it's important because I think historically, our power and influence has been decoupled from finances because if we didn't have the finances, if you didn't have control of the finances, you then had to use other means, right? So we need to couple that back, or rather bring it together in order for women to have the influence that they need side by side by men to make things happen.
It's really interesting because in my family, my great grandmother had gone to university. Her husband hadn't had the opportunity to, and she ended up teaching him finance. And he went on to work with Thomas Edison at General Electric because of her teaching him. And when you don't have that passed down or those stories passed down to kind of cling to, you really are at that disadvantage to the system. And I think, it makes me think also of your mother, and she was a very powerful, learned woman. What can you tell me a little bit about her story? I read what you had written on LinkedIn, but for all of our viewers who didn't get the opportunity to read that and to hear from you, I would love to hear a bit about her and her influence on you.
So the thing about it, we were talking just before we started, and talked about the importance of our mothers in our lives, and like most others, my mother was my mother. That was the important point about her, right? She was the one who looked after us, cared for us, the one we loved, etc. And even though we knew about her career and her job and the things she had achieved, but the primarily important thing was that she was our mother, right? And I accepted, all those her achievements. And as I grew up, I began to sort of, appreciate, even from a young age, right? But always from the perspective of that was one part of her, right? But then the more I grew, the more I knew it was important to actually recognize what my mother had done solely in the field of her achievements, right? Not coupled with her motherhood.
That's a good point.
Because history, right, even though we might want to change the way history is written, tends to do that. Okay. And the likelihood is that you miss out on all of that, right? The achievements. But one thing that I think is important was one, it was service, right, that drove my mother. It was integrity, it was professionalism, and it was hard work. And right now, I can't understand how she balanced all of that, right? And my father was a most supportive father, which is why we are the way we are, because they felt the same way about bringing up the children. And they have three daughters, and I have my brother, so the four of us, but mainly daughters. But I wonder how to manage to do it with four children. And my mother would come home at lunchtime. We were off school, we went to boarding school, we were school abroad, right? So, but when we were back home, my mother would be home at lunchtime every day. I don't know how she managed that,
No.
right? Together with her career. But I learned and I saw and I was fascinated. I went to Japan for the first time this year. My mother had been to Japan on a business trip at half my age. As a lawyer, all those decades ago, I remember I only made it now, right? And she was about half my age. That was in those days.
Yeah.
So I'd seen her, in all these spaces. I'd been sometimes to conferences with her. I'd seen her as a fellow of the Institute of Directors in the UK. I'd been to the institute. We weren't allowed there as children, but we'd go with her, we'd sort of drop her off and then come back, right? I
Yeah.
knew where it was. Right. Board meetings. She talked about board meetings. Sometimes she'd have a board dinner in the house, right? And invite the directors. We'd see the pictures at the board meetings. We'd talk about corporate governance. She was my advisor when I started being on boards, right? So very much, I was very much and learned from her. But aside of the technicalities of those rules in her corporate role, it was more of the values, right? And honestly, all I can say is that I strive to live up to her values. We all do, right? So I think that that was really what it was about, and the legacy of thinking about other people who didn't have as much. And one thing, by the way, is my mother's act of philanthropy and how it worked was it didn't matter how little you had or how little she ever had, you could always give somebody something. It didn't matter how big the need was that the person had, you could contribute towards it. And I've learned immensely from that as well.
What else of her do you hope to carry forwards in your own life, in your own career?
Oh, there's certainly a lot. And I have a podcast with the BBC that is coming out on December
Oh,
22nd.
wow.
Yes, it's BBC The Conversations,
Yeah.
and it's called the female philanthropists. And it'll run for a few episodes, and it's with a lovely lady of French origin called Adina, and she is an amazing philanthropist. And so they have this, a contrast of two philanthropists, one from we're both from France in the sense that, I've lived here for so many years,
Yeah.
but obviously with very different backgrounds, and was sort of amazing. And so I did talk about my mother and the work that she's doing, and that we have carried on since she passed away only a few months ago, but there's still her giving to foundations and all of that. We've made sure that that has happened, and that will continue. So there's certainly that, but I think for me it's even institutionalizing it and creating it on a scale. So we just recently recently launched last year Women in Philanthropy and Impact Africa, which is bringing together a network of women philanthropists and connecting philanthropy to initiatives in Africa to do with economic and closing the gender gap for women, especially low-income women, in terms of training, in terms of health gaps, innovation, and all of that. Right? It's the biggest, it's the early stages, right? But this is something that we did. So of course that comes from, without a doubt. I mean, I have co-founders, but obviously my interest, which wasn't in my field of expertise, certainly came from my mother's legacy. So is how to take her work, right? Continue her legacy with the foundations that she has created with my father, by the way, as well. She has she had a legacy of giving to a cancer foundation, which was hers, and then she has a phrase which is my her name and my father's name, which is a church foundation as well. So it's making it's not just continuing that, but how can we really scale up the impact as well? So that's certainly I see that. But in terms, especially in the times that we have now, is those values. That's what drives should drive decision making in leadership values, and I think that that's what is truly important to me. And I hope that I reflect that with not only my children, but people I work with, the people around, and my thought leadership.
Yeah. I feel like you and I were lucky to have, strong female influences in our lives, which is a blessing. Not everyone obviously has that. What foundations do girls need to step into leadership with freedom and courage?
Oh, what a question. I never realized it was an issue. Because when you have a certain background, for me, all the issues to do with opportunity, access, inequality professionally, that battle had been done and won and lost before and won before my mother,
Yeah.
because my mother was a lawyer. So I never realized it until I was an adult because I didn't see barriers.
Right.
And so that was actually quite shocking to me. So the thing is, one, I know that role models are so important. So, and that's one thing that we try to do with 100 Women at Davos is, to feature women more often, and even on our channels, right? Because we need to normalize female leadership, right? So it's nothing unusual, it's normal. So normalizing role modeling is important. Mentorship is so key, as we all know. Having trusted networks of influence is really key. Opening the doors to youth, female youth leaders is important. But also, that is, talking about women. But importantly, I believe is policies. Policies are both policies within government policies and legislation that remove some of those barriers, right? As well as internal policies, corporate governance policies within organizations as well that overcome barriers for women. Things like flexibility, maternity, parental leave, not just maternity leave. Paid leave. Flexible hours. All these things, right? Important. Addressing biases in so many ways. Overcoming sexual harassment, which is a problem within organizations, and very often people don't want to talk about it. It is, all of those kinds of barriers, are really very important, and starting them from young. But one thing that we're also realizing, right, is we talked about organizations as if they're a thing, and then talk about women as if they're human beings, right? Where are the men in all of this, and where are the young men in all of this, right? Are they being left out of the conversation? And they mustn't be left out. And so bringing in young boys, young men into the conversation, our male colleagues that very often don't actually realize a lot of this. We have the knowledge, but it stays within us as well. It's also very important. So a lot to be done, but I think we know what it needs to be done.
I think it's so important, as you said, to make sure that we bring men into the conversation. They are on this planet with us, living with us, and we need them as much as they need us. And so often I do think that when you start to gain your own power, you're like, I'm just going to surround myself just with women. And it's good to have spaces that are just, it's like crucial to have spaces that are just for women, for that safety, but also, to have other male leaders around us supporting the he for she part of it is so important. And that doesn't get talked about, I don't think, enough sometimes.
Yeah, it doesn't, but increasingly there's recognition especially with some of the movements that we've seen, especially with the development of things like the manosphere that you've heard about. So there's certainly a whole cultural issue there that needs to be dealt with. So that is more and more being dealt with now, and it concerns a lot of men themselves as well. What do we do about this?
Yeah.
So a lot more work needs to be done in that arena, yes.
And I want to make sure I get to talking to you about audacity. Um, you talk about this not as arrogance, but as boldness, that's rooted in purpose. I feel like Hello, I'm Bossy is really about that sort of knowing your voice and using it. And that to me is being, bossy, but also audacity. What does that look like for women leaders today?
You know, um, Very often when you say those words, right, and people listening, even if they feel inspired, right, to me, inspiration is not just that, it's not just a positive feeling. Inspired means that it's giving you um, that nudge or that push to do something,
Mhm.
right? And it's just to say that it is in all of us because oftentimes it is felt, people may feel that you're watching something and it belongs to something or somebody else and not claiming it as their own. And so that audacity is not, she is audacious and she has done that, and wow, that's amazing. No, it is, she can do it, I can do it. Because the thing about it is, do you know about her history, where she came from? The people who wake up and are audacious. I certainly wasn't one of those, right? The people who are in spaces, I wasn't one of those. I was shy for many years, decades even.
Really?
Right. Yes.
Hmm.
Shy and an introvert, both. Because you can have introverts that are not shy. I was shy, very, very shy, painfully shy, and an introvert, which
Hmm.
has just stayed with me. The shyness, not, but the introversion, yes. I still need to be in my space and gather my own energy from time to time, and I'm quite happy being on my own as well.
Uh-huh.
But what drives you is not to focus on those, is to focus on your reason, your purpose, on what you want to achieve. And the rest comes very often, it just comes with practice and just being there. And when you're shy, very often it's sort of you sort of what's the word? You sort of magnify those little things that you feel didn't go well. Most of the time, people don't notice, and even if they notice, they'll get over it.
Yeah.
Because other people do things and you get over it as well, right?
Yeah.
And you forgive them. Sometimes it just even makes them even more approachable, right? Oh gosh, they're human. And what is important is what it is you have to give within your team, within your organization, with your in the world. And if we also look at it and say, if I am not audacious, then what is going to happen? Who will step into that space? What world is going to happen? What space will happen? The kinds of things that I see and I don't like, that is what will happen. So I need to claim that space for myself and for others. And you'd be surprised, there's so many spaces where are so available, are so open, and we don't realize it. And sometimes just putting up your hand, something just stepping up, just stepping in is all that you need. It doesn't have to be anything big or huge. Just that first step, volunteering, creating something, saying something, writing something, right? Changing something. And then it grows from there. And then you become that audacious woman who all she did was take a first step and a second one and a third one.
How did you choose audacity over your shyness and your introvert?
It's there were two aspects, right? And even though you use the word audacious, but I would never have thought of it myself, and I would never have described myself. I've never used that. But when I look at some things, I mean, yeah, yes, I mean, you walk into Davos inside, you set up your own women's community, right? So obviously, but that wasn't what drove me. What drove me was just simply where are the women, right? So sometimes it's just that. But So it's more of the need to do something. I know that it certainly helped being in banking because I was in customer facing and I wanted to be customer facing. So I had to, overcome some of that. So that started, at that point in time. But I think it was just, seeing the change that needed to happen,
Mhm.
right? And wanting to make it happen. But importantly, also having surrounding yourself with the right people is important.
Mhm.
And one last thing that certainly did it, at least to this sort of level of global scale, simply was when I was introduced to a lady. It was just on a video call, and someone said to me, "Of course, you need to meet this lady because what you're trying to build, right? I think that this is really great." But she would know because she's a corporate woman, corporate leader, and we had this call, and you know what she said to me, and she goes, "You want to build this network of global women leaders? I don't know you. Who are you?" I thought, oh my God. So it's not about what you want to build, how you want to build it. That's part of it, right? But if nobody knows you, right, you're not going to build it.
Yeah.
So it was clear that, it wasn't just the building, but you had to be your thought leadership and your voice had to be known. The message that you're carrying, people had to hear it. It wasn't just a thing, building network and this and that. That is, yes, you have to build it, but your thought leadership was critically important. What are your ideas and why are you doing this? And why should anybody want to be involved in what you're doing?
Yeah. We started talking before recording, obviously, about some of these things when you asked me what I hoped to, get out of this conversation. And I had said that I selfishly do this to learn from women like yourself. And I could almost cry because everything that you've said in the last 10 minutes or so speaks so authentically and specifically to where I am in my life. And I feel like it will to many of the listeners too, who are working to make themselves known. As many women who listen who are in the leadership space, there's as many who are, hoping to get into that space and hoping to make themselves feel like they deserve to be in that space. What's one last piece of advice you would give to women who are working at owning themselves and being able to go into the rooms that you inhabit now?
First of all, and this goes back to my background, maths, numbers, two, economics, right? And three, academic research. If you remember that there's only 5 to 7% of top leadership positions, right, that are occupied by women, the terrain is vast. It's as simple as that. The numbers, and the thing is that we shouldn't go by emotions, what people are saying. The numbers are telling us that we need more women in those spaces. So that's the first thing. We need you in those spaces. Number two, because of my work, because of a lot of things I'm doing, I'm in lots of spaces where I'm with women. And how energizing, even for me as an introvert, how energizing when you hear women who are doing different things, different spaces at different levels. So people also need to hear your voice. For me, it's not about me. Yes, I'm there to speak or to whatever it is, but I'm also there to gain, right? So we need to hear your voices. You're doing us a favor by stepping into that room. You need to be there for yourself, but also for the world, because organizations perform better. And the research shows over and over again that there's correlation and association between women's leadership, right, or balanced leadership and performance. Some people, by the way, either tell you that it's not a correlation, but that is association. One professor who I know very well, what she said was that when she did her research, what happens is that if you have women in the room, but they're not included, their voices are not led and not listened to, they're not part of decision making, they're only there as numbers, and of course you're not going to get the change, right? But when women are there, they're listened to, they're part of decision making, they're included, right? Then the magic begins to happen. Social impact sustainability initiatives. When you have more women in leadership, it tends to happen. Risk in organization tends to fall. So women are needed to be in the space. There's a lot of space for women because most of the spaces are lacking women. And it's not a woman against a man thing. No, there are many, many, many men, and I even believe the most men actually do want it, but they're just silent about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we just need to make that effort to be in the spaces, and that we need to have you women as leaders. We know that there are many barriers, but the people and many people that are doing things to deal with those barriers. Try to find also an impact organization, that is to say, a professional organization, but one that's also trying to change things. And when you see what is happening and you feel that I can be part of this, right? It doesn't matter how little, how much time, just being part of it to make the change happen that will affect the generation coming and the generation after that is, to me, is satisfying. So you're not just saying that there's a problem, you're saying that I'm working, collaborating with others to make change happen. And that you will go down in history as being part of that change. So we need to have you in that space. The world needs to have you in that space. There's a lot of space available, but we need to take that step and we understand their barriers. And sometimes there's some places you have to step away from, no doubt about it, because there's a mental health crisis and for women in many ways. So you have to step away from those negative and toxic spaces without a doubt.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This is a wonderful start to the day to talk to you. I'm sure whenever people are listening to this, they will feel your energy and your enthusiasm for the topic, but also your relatability, which was unexpected to me. I thought you were, I have you on this pedestal, and then to find out that you're relatable as well as all these other fantastic things is just like the best start to my day altogether. So thank you again for joining Hello, I'm Bossy, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Catherine. Really appreciate that and wishing you all the best. Bye for now.